I have a tendency to wander around. If I fall off the stage, just laugh and then we'll get on with it. So, as Dave said, this is going to be a talk which is going to be quite different to anything else you're going to hear at the Forensic Summit this year. In fact, it's going to be quite different to most talks you've heard at various conferences, because there is no technical stuff in here, at least not computer technical. Brain technical, yes. So, it's going to be interesting. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So, who am I? Well, my name's Lee Whitfield, as was said. Work for a company called Digital Discovery up in Dallas. And I'm responsible there for all of the forensic and e-discovery work that we do. And I'm responsible for like a team of 5 people up there. So before we get started, I'm going to give you 10 seconds before Dave locks the door and you're all stuck in here as my prisoners. This is going to get slightly uncomfortable at times during this. So if words such as sex offend you or make you feel uncomfortable, this might not be the place for you, okay? Fair warning, okay? Now, we are going to be talking a lot about the psycho whatever of looking at disturbing imagery, okay? So you may sit here and think, well, that doesn't really apply to me. I don't work in that field. Why would that be relevant to me? Well, we all here work in forensics or IR, or even some of us work in e-discovery, and we will come across people, whether we work with them or for them, or they work under us, who have at some point had exposure to this kind of material. And they may still have some leftover baggage from dealing with that material. So it's up to you as employers or as colleagues to, if you see anything in this presentation which you think, either I or one of my colleagues might be suffering from this, then you've got an obligation as a human being to try and help out with that. So, yeah, don't go anywhere. It'll be all relevant. And I just want to start off with this quote, and this is one of my favorite quotes about this kind of work. You cannot go and roll in the mud without getting dirty, okay? Whenever we look or whenever we're exposed to or see anything which is considered to be disturbing material, it's going to have some effect on us, whether we want to admit that or not. A lot of people choose not to admit that, which is fine. But somewhere along the line, it's going to have that effect. So, what do we classify as disturbing material? Well, I've got a few suggestions here, but this is by no means comprehensive. So, the most popular one, sadly, is images of child sexual abuse. We get a lot of that in this field, because with the explosion of the internet, more people get online, more of this sharing can go on. And I can't remember the exact statistics, but it's something like 1,400 new images a day are produced in this category, which is horrendous. We also have other things in there. You know, you can go online easily now and go and see someone being beheaded. You can see other kinds of mutilation taking place. You can see rape. You can see snuff. You see people being, murdered in really horrible ways. All of this has got some psychological effect on people. And we don't just have just these singularly either. I mean, we often will see these all drawn in together. And I'm sure that anyone who's dealt with this material for any period of time has got their own stories about the really weird crap which people look at in their own time, or even on their employer's time. So we deal with some really crazy, crazy stuff. And because of this, we have consequences to deal with. And we may not necessarily understand what all these consequences are. But we're going to touch on a few of them today. Certainly, they cause mental issues. Sometimes these mental issues can cause physiological issues. And then sometimes those physiological issues can cause legal issues down the line. Unfortunately, there's a couple of investigators that I know of who weren't able to leave all this at home. They got embroiled in the stuff which they were investigating, and they're now now in prison or worse. So we need to make sure that we take the precautions we need to take to make sure that we don't end up in the same place. And most of this we're going to talk about today happens inside our mind, okay? We have the opportunity here to explore why we do certain things, how we process certain data, how we process images of child sexual abuse, how we process violence. All these things we're going to talk about today. I love this quote. Let's start off by talking about recall. I don't mean Arnold Schwarzenegger. I mean our ability to remember something. If you ask people who were around at the time, where were they, what were they doing when JFK was shot? Fast forward a few years, ask them the same question about the moon landing. Those people can typically tell you where they were, who they were with, what activity they were engaged in at the time. That's really weird, because that's 50 years ago that these things happened now. 50 years. So why are they so vivid in people's minds? It's because they're called what's called flashbulb memories. Now, flashbulb memories are an event happens, or you experience or see something, and there's an attached emotion. That emotion is what makes that memory vivid and sticks it somewhere deep in your mind. So we all experience the same kind of thing. So you probably remember something like your first day of school, your first kiss, the day you got married, the day your children were born. You know, those kinds of things. All very, very positive emotions associated with memory. And because of that, we can recall them very, very easily. Now, unfortunately, this doesn't just happen with positive emotion. This also happens with negative emotion. So whenever we experience something that causes anger or fear or anything like that, that also gets pushed down into our memory quite deeply and gets embedded there. So, you know, you may think about a time when your life was in danger, or you were angry at someone, or when you found out that someone you cared about had passed away. Once again, all very, very vivid memories, at least as vivid as the positive ones. So, if you want to test this theory and you don't have exposure to disturbing imagery, you can always go to the Gore subreddit and look at that. Now, don't go and do that, really. I'm just kidding. But those images will stay with you for a very, very long time. Some sick people out there. Okay, so on the list which I put up before, down at the bottom, we had pornography. Now, you may think, well, why do we need to talk about pornography? We're all adults here, you know, we do what we do, and that's fine. Well, there was a study a couple of years ago that came out that said that pornography rewires your brain. Okay, causes physiological changes in your brain. If someone examined your brain, they could almost tell that you had a pornography problem. Okay. Now, there were some detractors which came forward and they said, yeah, this is pretty much a chicken and egg scenario. We don't know if it's the watching of pornography causes these physiological effects, or if these people have a predisposition because of their physiological defects in their brain to go and seek out pornography. Well, I'm not saying this is definitive, but the work which has been done since then has shown that it's certainly more the former than the latter. Occasionally, some people do have that predisposition, but it's only aggravated more by going out and seeking pornography. So, why? What effect does pornography have on our brain? Well, pornography is like anything else. It's a stimulant, okay? So, just a comparison here. I like coconut cream pie, Okay? Fantastic. I'm not hear any argument about it whatsoever. So I eat coconut cream pie, so I have a stimulant coming in. As I'm eating this coconut cream pie, my brain's like, you're enjoying this. Let's release some dopamine into your brain. So this dopamine secretion occurs, and then because of that, the dopamine causes me to have a pleasurable experience. So what does this do? Well, we're creatures of habit. So what we want to do is that we want to eat more coconut cream pie. Okay? It just causes this loop. And you told from the shape of me that I have my fair share of coconut cream pie. So this is exactly the same thing that happens with pornography. We get pornography as a stimulant. It comes in. We have dopamine secretion in the brain. And that is all picked up, and we get a pleasurable experience, causing us to want to go back and seek out more pornography. Okay? So that's the first thing that pornography does to your brain. The second thing is probably the most damaging, is picture a field, okay? This field of grass that's probably waist high and it's untouched. But you have a task to get across this field every day. So you walk across this field in the exact same spot 2 times a day, there and back. After a few days, what starts to happen? Well, the field gets worn down in the path that you make. Your brain does a very, very similar thing. So different parts of your brain are responsible for different things that you do. So you'll have a piece of your brain for motor skills, a piece of your brain for audio, a piece of your brain for visual, a piece of your brain for memories. And all these have to communicate. So what happens is that these things called neural pathways are created in your brain. So, for example, I suck at juggling. Okay, I can do 2 ball juggling. That's it. That's my limit. You throw a 3rd ball in there, and it's just not pretty. So, if I practiced, and I would get better. Now, why do I get better? Well, because my brain says you're going to use motor skills, you're going to use your vision, you're going to use some mental acuity in order to learn how to juggle. So after a while, you become expert at this. And the reason for that is that these neural pathways are being created, and the more that you do something, the stronger these neural pathways get, which means that this dopamine secretion happens more and more easily. So this is where, things like addiction happen too. Because if you're looking at pornography all the time, even if it's just, at work, your brain is there working away saying, right, let's create these neural pathways, and soon you become expert at looking at pornography. Now, some people may think, yes, that was my life's ambition. No, this is actually really, really bad because it causes a lot of other problems. Is everyone here familiar with the term porn creep? It's not the guy who tries to take pictures of you surreptitiously. What porn creep is that you get so expert at digesting pornography, and your brain gets so good at rewarding you for looking at pornography, is that you then find it very, very difficult to become aroused by real-world contact. So you have a sexual relationship with pornography, but are unable to sustain a sexual relationship with a person because of your pornography addiction. That's certainly one of the bad things that can come of this. Now, that's all well and good. I mean, as long as you can try and manage that, you're usually okay. There is another far more serious psychosexual problem that we have to deal with, though, which is suppression. Now, whenever you're at home and you're looking at pornography, it's great, fine. Do whatever you want to do, as long as you don't break the law. See whatever you want to. But what happens when you're looking at pornography at work as part of your job? This gets really, really messy, because here you get the stimulant trying to enter your mind, and your brain's sitting there thinking, right, here's the stimulant, this is what we enjoy doing, so it's time to get aroused. Well, except the problem is we put up this barrier with suppression, and so what happens is that arousal just pings right off. We shove this thing deep down inside our mind somewhere because no one really wants to deal with the consequences of being aroused at work. It's just not something we want to do. So what happens with this? Well, while we're at work, this is great, fantastic. Let's keep this, just keep suppressing this, just keep going, keep going, keep going. But when you go home, and it's time for you to be intimate and to be aroused on your own time, you find that there's a conflict. And the brain hates conflict. The brain automatically tries to find resolution to any conflict. You ever just laid in bed at night with thoughts going through your head about something which is pending? That's because your brain's trying to find resolution. So what we get here is that after a while of suppressing these feelings, it becomes more difficult for you to become aroused for something. It also is very degrading to sexual performance. Because what's happening is that your mind is getting into the habit and becoming expert at suppressing sexual feelings. So you've got to really be careful of this. And then once you start doing this, and you have this conflict in your mind, the only resultant feeling that comes out is aggression. So you may not even realize that this is happening, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in just a minute. But for a lot of forensic investigators, simple things can set them off. Okay? Simple things that wouldn't set off normal people, people, somehow get under your skin, and they just seem to be a lot worse. Okay? I have an 8-year-old son, and he does annoying things, and I shout at him. Would I shout at him if I wasn't involved in this kind of work? Yeah, I'll probably still do it anyway. But we just have to be very, very careful about managing these emotions. So, aggression specifically. I'm sure everyone's heard these or read these news articles saying a new study has come out showing that video games lead to violence, or watching violent movies leads to violence. Well, I understand there's a lot of skepticism to these kinds of things. I've got a friend who, she studies this for a living. She's widely considered to be one of the experts on aggression from media. And when I speak to her about this, she says, she has the statistics, she has the numbers, showing that if you put violence and violence and violence into your mind, that what you're going to end up with at the end is increased aggression. Now, how you deal with that is something entirely. I mean, I would hope that people wouldn't go into their office one day and completely lose it with all of the fellow employees. This is one of those instances where you've got to seek assistance in dealing with this, because if you let these things go for any period of time unchecked, that level of aggression continues to increase, and you run the risk of facing those particular consequences. So that's regular pornography and violence as input. Now I'm going to move on to the more difficult subject of images of child abuse. This one, I mean, you could take everything that we've said so far and pack it into this very, very easily, because the feelings that you get from looking at this, quite often, that they generate feelings of wanting to avenge the people that you're looking at the pictures of or the video of, which can itself lead to increased aggression and all that kind of stuff. One of the things which causes a real problem to us is that we talk about those neural pathways. Imagine a scenario where you get a computer in and it has hundreds of thousands of pictures on this computer, okay? Now, they're not all pornographic, they're not all images of child sexual abuse, but some of them are. So you need to produce these pictures for some kind of legal thing, and it's up to you to identify just the images of child sexual abuse. So you stick on gallery review, or you go in and you use something like C4P, and you just rapidly scroll through all the screens and screens of pictures. There's a guy I know back in England, he has 3 monitors on his desk, huge monitors. And whenever he's doing these kinds of investigations, they are full of pictures to scroll through. So you're scrolling through rapidly, and you're like, oh, there's a picture, mark that one. Scroll through, oh, there's another one, mark that one. Scroll through, oh, there's another one. Think about those neural pathways. What are you doing? You're coaching your brain to pick out those pictures in amongst a huge array of different things. So that's doing 2 different things. First of all, that's making you expert at that, which is good for your job, not so good for when you're out doing stuff. You may find yourself thinking, that parent probably shouldn't have dressed that child that way, or things along those nature. But the other thing that this does is that rapidly identifying images and increasing your hit rate on these types of images means that these images are more likely to sink into your long-term memory, which will make it easier for you to recall in the future. So even though something may have been on your screen for a second or 2 seconds, that is now stuck in your mind. You add on to the fact this whole shock factor for flashbulb memories, and that you may never forget that as long as you live. I thought I'd swap these over, but obviously not. So, stress amplification. So think of this bucket, okay? So you have this bucket, and a regular person has regular stresses. They have financial stresses, they have familial relationship stresses, they may have work stresses, and they all pour into this bucket, okay? Now, at the end of the day, whenever you go to sleep, this bucket kind of gets emptied into your mind, and your mind processes all this data. But if you're dealing with disturbing imagery all day, what's happening is that you've already got all this latent stress. So your bucket's almost full already. So when you start pouring in other stresses, it doesn't take long until that starts to overflow. So simple things, like I said before, that people tend to deal with quite well suddenly become huge ordeals. You know, you miss your rent by a day or something like that. And rather than being, oh, it's all right, we'll pay for it tomorrow, you're lying in bed thinking, what the crap did I do? This is terrible. I can't believe I let this happen. Simple stresses become so much bigger whenever you deal with disturbing imagery. And this is the kind of thing it leads to. It's not mine, by the way. Yes. No, I mean, that's something I don't have experience with. So, yeah, let me explain what my experience is a little bit for you. So, over here, the laws are a bit different than they are in the UK. So over here, you won't see anything like that unless you're in law enforcement or unless you do the defense work specifically for that. In the UK, there's provisions for people who do these investigations. So for the 5.5 years that I was doing this work in the UK, we were contractors for the police, so to speak. And like 90 to 95% of the work that we got was images of child sexual abuse. So we were able to do that in our own offices and everything else. So that's what my exposure is. I mean, I know what's out there. I've seen enough of it, really. But in terms of interviewing people, it's not something I've got a lot of experience with. I know that Cindy probably is one of the good people to talk to about that, so I'd certainly refer you to her. So, what are some of the psychological effects of looking at indecent images of children? Well, there's quite a few of them. And once again, by no means a comprehensive list, but there's a whole bunch of different things to deal with. And, we pick out a couple here. Overprotectiveness. I have 4 children of my own, okay? Before coming to the States, when I was actually involved in doing this work, my kids didn't go to other people's houses. They didn't go and play unsupervised anywhere. The idea of, because I know what's out there, the idea of anything happening to them was too paralyzing for me to allow that to happen. And I don't know if other people have similar experiences, but it's certainly something that not just I've experienced, but I've heard other people talk about too. Anxiety. You see something shocking, and it can immediately produce some emotional response. And then cynicism. Every single thing that I've read and heard about it shows that whenever you deal with indecent images of children, with images of child sexual exploitation, that you have a significant increase in cynicism. But I think it's all BS. One of the most significant things that you can suffer as a result of this is something called STSD. You may recognize it sounds pretty familiar to PTSD. PTSD on its own, is a huge problem. Okay, and I'm not going to talk about that, but what STSD does is that it manifests itself secondarily, and you experience the same symptoms as someone suffering from PTSD. So, people who typically suffer from this would be army wives. Okay, their husband comes back from Afghanistan or Iraq, and they suffer from PTSD. The wife, secondarily, experiences those same emotions, and so she's suffering from STSD. Another group of people who experience this are psychologists, the people who work with those soldiers who suffer from PTSD. And so they hear about everything, and then they experience those symptoms themselves. Now, you may think, well, that's a bit soft. Why would you suddenly inherit all these symptoms from someone? Well, it's because we're human. The emotions that we have are extremely complex. Whenever people get hurt or something bad happens to them, we have a couple of different responses. The first one is typically going to be anger, but others that we might experience at the same time may be compassion, okay, or a willingness to change something. So, STSD is very, very dangerous. If you feel like you may be suffering from this now, go and seek psychological help. Okay, do it as soon as you can, because this is dangerous. This can certainly lead to people isolating themselves. It can cause fear, can cause increased anxiety, and in some cases people will kill themselves. Okay, it's not something to be messed with. Now, in terms of how this affects us as forensic investigators, or why it's caused, is because we have a level. Okay, we talk about burnout. Okay, now I don't mean burnout as in, well, I've worked a long day and I'm tired, I want to go home, or I'm really looking forward to my vacation next week because I've been working so hard. Psychological burnout is something else. It's kind of reaching your emotional limit, and Yeah, I mean, that's what it is. It's an emotional limit. So you spend all this time, there's your limit, you're spending all this time looking at all this bad stuff, and sooner or later you're going to hit that limit. But here's the problem, is that it's 11 o'clock in the morning on Monday. You don't have the option to stop working. Your boss would be pissed. So what do? Is that you force your way through that limit. Now, when you do that, your brain starts screaming at you. It's like, what the hell are you doing? I've given you all these warnings to stop, and you're still persisting. Well, this is really, really bad, because you're then trying to deal with emotions that your brain isn't ready to deal with. So by doing this, you're well on your way to developing secondary traumatic stress disorder. And one of the things which kind of goes hand in hand with this, they do sound very, very similar, is vicarious traumatization. Now, what you may think, well, we have secondary and then we have vicarious. Aren't they both the same thing? Well, secondary is you're experiencing the same emotions that's PTSD. Vicarious traumatization is that you see something and you respond to it as if that event happened to you. Okay? So you see a video of someone being shot or even raped. And what's your reaction to that? You may well feel that, that's happened to you because of what you've seen. It's dangerous, once again. And quite often, if you're suffering from STSD, you may also suffer from vicarious traumatization. So, one of the things that I did in preparation for this presentation today is that I did the survey. And I put this survey out online, and I invited people to go and sign up and answer these questions. And these questions were, well, they weren't really questions. They were statements, and people were asked to rate them 1 to 5 on whether they agreed or didn't agree, and then offered their own comment afterwards. And I haven't closed this survey, by the way. It's still open. I'll post a link on my website so people can continue to do it, because I want to gather as much information as possible. So what did these people say? Well, almost universally, even people that said, it doesn't even really affect me that much, everyone said it had a negative impact on their life. Okay? Now, they cited a bunch of different things. Some of those symptoms that we looked at before, the overprotection, the anxiety, the cynicism, lots of things like that. Some people even said that it had a negative effect on their sex life. Okay? So, just things to bear in mind. If any of this sounds familiar, then, you're probably you're probably in good company. But the thing that I found really, really interesting about this is that even though everybody said, this has a negative effect on my life, everyone said it's rewarding. So that's interesting. This is banking, okay? So this is, I'm going to do all this work now for future payoff, which is great. For motivation, there's no better way of sticking with something, okay? If you know that by playing soccer every day, you're one day going to play in the Premier League in England and earn hundreds of thousands of dollars every week, then that's a hell of a motivation. The problem is that sometimes, especially when it comes to emotional and psychological turmoil, is that first piece still has to be dealt with long after the result is gone. So we need to make sure that we take the appropriate steps to deal with those, and we're going to move on to those in just a minute. The final thing that we mentioned here is a strong support system. And we'll talk about this more in the next few minutes. But if you're singly working on these types of cases and you don't have anybody to talk to about this, that can be very, very bad. Okay, even if it's a spouse or a girlfriend or a friend or family member, you've got to speak to someone about it just to alleviate some of that pressure. They say that a burden. Oh crap! I've forgotten the quote now. But yeah, sharing burdens makes it light. There you go. So that's extremely important with the work that we do. So we talk about coping mechanisms. Now, there's two categories of coping mechanisms. Okay, there's the first one, which don't do these. Okay, and like I said before, some people think that they're immune. Okay, now there may be a very small percentage of people who think, I've looked at this stuff for 20 or 30 years. It no longer has an effect on me. Maybe true. I'd be willing to bet that, yeah. You can ignore the problem and think, everything will be fine in the end. I'll look forward to that end reward as opposed to what's going on now. Compartmentalization. This is a really interesting one. And this is talked about throughout all the studies into STSD and all of the emotional trauma which we've already talked about. Compartmentalization does not work. You might sit there and think, I'm looking at this, I'll push it aside, look at this, push it aside, look at this, push it aside. The problem is that those things are still active in your memory and you're suppressing them again, just like we talked about before. Once again, you get increased aggression from that. You can affect yourself in a whole variety of different ways. And then the last one I just want to touch on here is that occasionally what will happen is you'll have an experienced investigator sitting in a lab with someone who's brand new, who's never seen this stuff before. And what tends to happen is that the new guy gets very, very insecure very, very quickly because he's having constant emotional responses to everything that he's seeing, but the guy who sits across the office from him is just going through, yep, no problem, I'm good to go, just keep going. And so they start to think, oh no, this isn't good. I'm obviously not going to be very good at this. And then it just adds more psychological trauma onto the things which they're already experiencing. And so we get more stress amplification and all kinds of stuff from there. So we need to make sure that whenever we have new people who come to work and do this kind of investigation, we tell them, I've been doing this for a long time. I do still have negative reaction to what I see. It's just that I've been doing it for so long, it's not quite as apparent because I've learned how to cope with it. And the coping mechanisms are available to you too. So what does work? Well, we already talked a little bit about this. Discussing a problem helps to spread it out. Yes? So there's kind of a cycle which goes around, is that whenever you look at these things to start with, you're shocked. The next part is that you have acceptance of what you've seen. Then I'm trying to think now of what it was, but it just goes around in this kind of circle where at the end of it, you kind of depressed because you're just like, oh, the world sucks. So this is why I'm saying, we are trained and told to do this a lot. And temporarily, there's probably not a big issue with it. But it's when you do this over long term that it's really going to screw you up, which, is why we talk about the things that do work. So compartmentalization may work until you get home and you can talk to someone about it, or you can go and see the person that's been appointed by your organization to deal with those kinds of things. Yeah. You don't look it, though. Yeah. Yep. And we will get onto that in just a minute. But, I mean, certainly, any kind of counseling or anything which is on offer, you need to take advantage of. That should just be a given. Other things you can do. You can take my example and go out and do lots of exercise. Yeah, great. It's not even on. You can do what Cindy does, and go out and join a musical group. Just this field sucks you in. Okay, it really sucks you in. So what happens is that you get up in the morning, you go to work, and you do your full day's work there. You come home, and what's the first thing that you do? You open your computer and you think, oh, I wonder what the latest blog post is. Or maybe I'll just do some research here for a little bit. Or, I'll write a blog post or listen to a podcast or something else. There's so much information out there that you could spend all your waking hours consuming it. And, this is great for your career, not so great for your psychological well-being. So I'm glad Rob's not here. Get away from the computer, okay? Put it away, and at least for a couple of hours a day, do something else. Now, that's not TV, that's not video games, because, once again, they can sometimes add to trauma. Get outside and do something else. There's the last thing on here, okay? This is soft and gooey and fluffy as you can get, okay? Positive thoughts. What the heck are you talking about? Right, positive thoughts. Think about the neural pathways that we were creating earlier on, okay? If you spend just a few minutes a day just sitting down, clearing your mind, meditating, something like along those lines, and trying to think of just positive things, what you're actually doing is that you're boring new neural pathways in your mind that will help you to become more positive in your reaction to things, okay? And it sounds all really fluffy, but it works. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that this is the be-all and end-all of coping mechanisms, because it really isn't. Everyone will have something different that they can do, okay, that will help them to deal with this. Some people find comfort in their family with their children. Some people will go out rock climbing. Some people go fishing. Some people will go and speed somewhere. But people deal with this all individually. One of the things which isn't really done a great deal is group discussions. So, and I would highly, highly recommend this, okay? So if there's a bunch of you in a lab who look at this material on any kind of regular basis, get together, talk it out. Get out of the lab to do this. Do not do it in the lab. In fact, if you can get out of the office, do it out of the office. Now, there's going to be conditions on this. First of all, this is confidential. You don't talk about what people talk about outside of this setting. Second of all, people should not be made to feel like they have to share things. It should be completely voluntary. And then that goes again for attendance. Do not make it mandatory, because if you make it mandatory, the first thing people are going to do is, you can't tell me what to do. Okay? I know I'm like that myself. Okay? What you can do instead is entice them. Coffee and donuts. Perfect. Come, and also, if it's 2 hours away from looking at a computer screen, people will be like, yes, get me out of here. Okay? These work, they're extremely effective, and even better for employers, they are extremely low cost. Okay? You don't have to pay hardly anything for these. We talked a little bit before about how people can go off and claim disability or workman's comp, or even come back and sue the company or organization for which they work because of things which happen to them. What we found from the survey that we did was that in a lot of instances, either people didn't know that psychological counseling and other coping mechanisms were available, or, even worse, they weren't offered. Okay? If your employer does not offer any kind of assistance with dealing with the material that you look at every day, they need to change. Okay? If they want evidence of why this should happen, then, show them the presentation. Go online and look up STSD and forensic investigators on Google, and you'll find a wealth of information. This isn't just some soft thing that people who, weak-minded people can't deal with graphic imagery. That's a stigma which has got to stop existing. Okay? And, from my own personal experiences, 2 different companies that I worked for, the first company, they had a counselor on call, essentially. Anytime you wanted to talk to them and go and visit them and talk to them that way, they were available. And 2 years of that, I feel like I was still a pretty well-adjusted person after coming out of that job. The second one was that I walked into this job, and the head of the company said, if you have any problems with what you look at, come and talk to me. I'm like, well, I'm not going to do that. First of all, because you're my employer. And so if I tell you something that affects me and potentially affects the type of work that I do, you could fire me. because you don't want someone who is weak-minded doing this work. The other thing is that this particular person had a very, very dark sense of humor. That's how they dealt with what they saw. And I was like, I really don't want to, I don't want to laugh about this. I want to talk about it. So it just turned me off to the whole thing. I came out of that job feeling just like an emotional wreck because I didn't talk to her. I didn't talk to anyone about it. So if you were responsible for other people, do what you can to put this in place. If you work for people who don't offer this, get them to offer it. If you don't know if they offer it, that's another failing. They've got to take care of that too. The final thing that I want to talk about it's widely acknowledged through all the studies that have been done, through the survey that I conducted, through talking with my peers and people who do this work every day, is that the best possible way of dealing with this is to have understanding people around you, people who you can confide in. Don't divulge the details by any means of what you look at, but just express the concerns. Family, friends, all those people who can be supportive will make a significant difference. Don't isolate yourself. Don't try and deal with it on your own. It's the worst possible thing you can do. I am and always will be eternally grateful for my wife and for all the hard work that she does in our home, but especially whenever I was dealing with things that were of a disturbing nature, she would be there to offer comfort and words of advice. Okay, you need to surround yourself with people like that. And that's all I've got for you today. If anyone's got any questions or just want to talk about something, I'm available. I'll be around for the next couple of days. So, questions?
I got two things that I want to ask. One thing that I know from personal experience works really well is a technique called EMDR. I movement something.
Redirection,
EMDR
something, yeah.
is the name of it. So if you're having trouble with this stuff, find a psychologist who does EMDR. It works really well. I don't know how it works except it changes neural pathways and reassigns things in your brain. And the other thing is, there's a woman by the name of Nicola Fortune, Nicolamorthe, out of University College Dublin, who's done a really nice PhD dissertation on this sort of stuff. And the third thing is Shift Wellness Program. Fantastic.
Cool, thank you very much. For the EMDR stuff, that was one of the questions that we asked on the survey. Do you know what EMDR is, and have you taken advantage of it? And widely, across the board, no. I'd never even heard of it in a lot of cases. So it can be, from what I understand, it's pretty useful. Yeah.
You on purpose are talking about a certain memory that you're having or something that sticks in your brain. At the same time, you hold two vibrating things. It sounds very strange, but there's a pattern of vibrations that changes with the attention speed of it, and it apparently changes the neural pathways on which that memory is processed. And then you have to figure stuff out. It works. I don't know.
Awesome. Cool. Yes.
My question is, a lot of the times when you're working on a case, generally and specifically the case for sensitive cases, people will say that the case is highly confidential. You can't talk about the case with anyone other than only the forensic analyst assigned to the case. Have you run into any problems or any kind of creative solutions in being able to put together support groups of other forensic analysts wherein you kind of have to talk about the case in order to get it out? Are there any
It's a very good question. Not something I've considered before. I don't know. I think that it's wrong to expect people to deal with that by themselves. I mean, it just, if that kind of language was used in some agreement, you probably want to have that looked at by someone else and changed, because coping with it, like I said, coping with that on your own can be psychologically damaging, and there should at least be some provision for counselling or something in there at least. And then, once again, I guess it depends on how specific you want to get. I mean, if you want to talk about the actual graphic imagery that you've looked at, and then that might not be the right thing to do in cases like that. But if you speak in more general terms, I've worked on a case, or I am working on a case where I've seen stuff that's like this. Yeah, a bit more fuzzy on the on that. So I don't know. Like I said, it's not something that I've really considered before. So it's been an interesting one to go and talk to GC or a lawyer about even. Anyone have anything else? Okay. Let's go get some lunch.